The Miami Dolphins come away victorious after a Week 8 victory over the Detroit Lions. We'll talk about this and more right after this. The Miami Dolphins visited the Detroit Lions this past Sunday and would come away with a 31-27 victory over the Detroit Lions. And I will say this game started a bit bleak in the sense that quickly the Dolphins were down 14-0, courtesy of, after the Dolphins had the possession for the first time, a fumble of undrafted rookie free agent Braylon Sanders, who on his first career catch would fumble the ball. And then right after that, the Lions would go down and they'd score a touchdown and go up 14-0. But let's talk a little bit about the stats of this game, and then we'll go into detail about a couple other things that happened throughout the game, and then looking into what the Dolphins are going to be facing the next few weeks as they look to improve their record and improve their probabilities of making the playoffs and hopefully end a playoff win drought, which their last playoff victory happened when I was 6 years old. I'm currently 29. It is currently the year 2022. That was the year 2000. Let's talk stats here. Tua Tagovailoa would lead the Dolphins in passing. Our franchise QB would go 29 for 36, throwing 382 yards with an average of 10.6 yards per pass. He would throw 3 touchdown passes. He would be sacked twice, losing 13 yards, and would finish with an overall QBR rating of 92.8 and an overall passer rating of 138.7. The Phins would be led by Raheem Mostert in the rushing department, who would go 14 carries, averaging 4.6 yards a carry, finishing with 64 yards with a long of 13 yards. And quietly, Raheem Mostert's putting together a pretty decent season. He currently has around 474 yards of rushing, leading the Dolphins. Tua Tagovailoa would actually rush the ball 5 times, going 19 yards. However, 18 of those coming on a long run. Outside of that, Chase Edmonds would go 4 carries for 14 yards, averaging 3.5 yards per carry. Now, let's talk about the Miami receiving corps. Once again, a incredible performance by Tyreek Hill, who had 12 receptions for 188 yards. He got those 12 receptions off of 14 targets, 15.7 yards average per catch, and he had a long of 42 yards in this game. But again, 188 yards. Currently, Tyreek Hill, mind you, there's only been 8 games. Tyreek Hill is at 970-something yards receiving this season. That's truly incredible. Jalen Waddle also had a decent game for his standards. He had 8 receptions off of 9 targets, going for 106 yards, but scoring 2 touchdowns. He would have a long this day of 29 yards. Mike Gesicki would come in with a distant third, getting 3 receptions for 38 yards, but he would score a touchdown, and he would have a long of 20 yards. Those 3 receptions happened off of 4 targets. Besides that, we had a couple other guys who showed up on the stat sheet. Notables are Braylon Sanders, who had 2 receptions for 17 yards. Unfortunately, one of those receptions, he would fumble, and he would set up the Lions on that touchdown drive that would take the score 14-0 in the first quarter. Let's talk about Miami and their defensive performance. They would be led by Javon Holland, who would have a total of 12 tackles, 10 of them solo, along with a pass defense. Landon Roberts would come in second, getting 8 total tackles, 4 of them solo. And then he'd be followed by Kader Kohou, who would have 6 total tackles, 5 of them total, and a tackle for loss. Another stalwart performance on the defensive side, especially on the defensive line specifically, was of Zach Sealer, who is a Michigan native. He would have 4 total tackles, 3 of them solo, but he would have a sack and a tackle for loss and 2 pass defense, along with a quarterback hit. Overall, the Dolphins would only be able to get 1 sack, but that sack was, in fact, a big one that came in a big moment as well. When it comes to the kicking return game in both kicks and punts, there would be 1 kick return by Raheem Mostert, who would go for 13 yards. They would have 2 punt returns by Cedric Wilson, who I think he had a decent game for punt return. He had 2 returns for 24 yards, which the Dolphins have been dead last in the NFL when it comes to punt returns. In field goals, Jason Sanders would go 1 for 1 with a field goal from 45 yards and hitting 4 for 4 from extra points. Thomas Morstead would have a relatively quiet day, as he would only have to punt once, and that punt would go 38 yards, but it would pin the Lions inside their own 20-yard line. Let's talk a little bit about the Detroit Lions. Jared Goff had a very good game. I got to say, in terms of overall performance, Jared Goff came out the gate swinging. He came out extremely hot, extremely in rhythm in all his passes. He would finish the game going 27 out of 37 for 321 yards with an average pass of 8.7 yards. Throwing a touchdown, he would not have any picks or interceptions. He would be sacked once for 10 yards, finishing with a QBR of 62.9 and an overall passer rating of 108.1. Jamal Williams would finish the day 10 carries for 53 yards, 5.3 average per carry, and he would end up with 2 touchdowns. CJ Moore would be a distant second with 1 carry for 13 yards. The Detroit Lions receiving core would be led by TJ Hawkinson. The tight end would finish with 3 receptions for 80 yards, 58 of them coming on 1 reception. He would be targeted 4 times. Khalif Raymond would come in second with 3 receptions for 76 yards. He had a couple drops in this game as well. Or he had a drop, a very crucial drop in this game. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's had a really good season, he would come in third place, going 7 receptions off of 10 targets for 69 yards, 21 of them coming on 1 reception. Defensively, the Detroit Lions would be led by Amani Oruwariye, who would get 8 total tackles, 6 of them solo. Malcolm Rodriguez would come in second, 7 total tackles, 5 of them solo, with a sack, a tackle for loss, a pass defense, and a quarterback hit. And then Alex Anzalone would come in third with 7 total tackles, 4 of them solo. For the kicking return game, both in kicks and punts, Maurice Alexander will have 1 kick return for 17 yards. And then Khalif Raymond will had 1 punt return for 4 yards. The Lions kicker, Michael Badgley, would go 2 for 2 with a long of 42 yards, and he would go 3 for 3 from extra point land. Jack Fox, the punter for the Lions, would go 2 punts for 117 yards, averaging 58.5 yards per punt with a long of 60 yards. So let's talk a little bit about the facts of this game. This game started off, like I mentioned, right off the bat, the Lions came out swinging. They would go on their first drive, 5 plays, 75 yards, taking 2 minutes and 1 second off the clock, which would culminate with a 7-yard touchdown rush by Jamal Williams. On the ensuing possession for the Dolphins, they would go 8 plays for 53 yards. And mind you, this drive started looking really, really good. But it would end when Tua Tagovailoa would find Braylon Sanders, and he would gain 13 yards on this, but he would fumble, and that fumble would be recovered by Malcolm Rodriguez. The ensuing possession for the Lions would go 6 plays, 78 yards, taking 2 minutes and 31 seconds off the clock, and will culminate with a DeAndre Swift touchdown pass from Jared Goff, which was a 7-yard touchdown pass. At this point, it's mission critical for the Dolphins. The Dolphins would go on their ensuing possession 9 plays for 80 yards, taking a total of 4 minutes and 46 seconds. And this drive would culminate with a Jalen Waddle 5-yard touchdown pass from Tua Tagovailoa. And now the score was 14-7. At this point, the Dolphins defense was not able to stop the Lions whatsoever. Ensuing possession for the Lions would go 6 plays, 75 yards, 2 minutes and 4 seconds, and would culminate with another Lions touchdown as Jamal Williams would go up the middle for 1 yard, scoring a touchdown run. At this point, the score is 21-7. The Dolphins would come right back, taking only 4 plays, 75 yards, taking 2 minutes and 16 seconds off the clock. And this would culminate in a Jalen Waddle 29-yard touchdown pass, bringing the score back to 21-14. The next 3 offensive possessions, which were Lions, Dolphins, Lions, would end up all in field goals, and that would culminate the half at 27-17, and that would be the end of scoring for the Lions. And this has been a trend for the Dolphins in which they'll have a couple of games in which they can shut out the opponent's team. They could shut out their opponent in the second half. Like, their second half defense has been incredible. You could say that about the game against the Steelers last week, the game against the Ravens, in which they pretty much only were able to come up with, well, I would say the Ravens was more of a fourth quarter performance for the defense. But overall, the second half defense for the Dolphins has been incredibly efficient, to say the least. The Dolphins would start off with a possession first in the second half, and that would culminate in a 9-play, 75-yard drive, taking 5 minutes and 49 seconds off the clock, and would end up with an Alex Ingold 1-yard rush. This turned out to be the first career touchdown for Alec Ingold, rushing touchdown, that is. Now, shortly before this, 2 plays to be exact, Tua Tagovailoa had thrown a pass to Trent Sherfield, who had gotten, it seemed to me, he crossed the goal line or was able to stretch over the plane and score a touchdown. It was not reviewed, but I think if they would have given him the touchdown pass, which would have been cool because then Tua would have finished with 4 touchdown passes on the game. But all the less, really cool for Alec Ingold to get his first career touchdown rush. Following possession for the Lions, and this is where the Lions all of a sudden started getting completely hammered by penalties, which first half, the Dolphins would have a lot of penalties, much like the previous game and the game before that. But the Lions would go only 5 plays, -2 yards, and that took a total of 3 minutes and 55 seconds. That's a lot of time for such little yardage. This drive would end up after, essentially, they were, at some point in this drive, they were 1st and 30 on their own 18-yard line. There was 2 straight penalties to their first-round pick of 2 years ago, or of a year ago, that is, Penei Sewell, along with just, inefficient offensive line play. I think after Sewell had 2 straight penalties, and you also had Taylor Decker, their center, who also had a penalty for false start. That drive would end up in a punt. The ensuing possession for the Dolphins would go 9 plays, 67 yards, taking 5 minutes and 4 seconds off the clock. Tua Tagovailoa would culminate that drive with an 11-yard touchdown strike to Mike Gesicki. However, on this play, Liam Eichenberg would be injured. He would injure his knee, and he would not return, having to leave on a cart. Ensuing possession for the Detroit Lions would go 5 plays, 1 yard, taking 3 minutes and 6 seconds. So you can see the trend here. Very little achieved offensively for the Lions in this second half. And they're taking 3 minutes and 6 seconds off the clock. That's a lot of time. Again, you could see this drive was also riddled by penalties by the Lions, along with the sack that occurred. This is where the sack would happen deep in the third quarter. Ensuing possession for the Dolphins would go 6 plays, 30 yards, taking 3 minutes and 47 seconds off the clock, and would end in a punt, which would pin the Lions at their own 12-yard line. Ensuing possession for the Lions would go 10 plays, 53 yards, taking 5 minutes, 27 seconds off the clock. And the drive would end on a long pass deep to the right, which would go harmlessly incomplete on a 4th and 1 play from the Miami 35-yard line. At that point, the Dolphins, this is, I think, the first game that we got to see the Dolphins really close out a game on the offensive side. There's nothing like closing out a game, taking a couple knees towards the end of the game. And this is exactly what the Dolphins did. Taking 9 plays, going 38 yards for a total of 2 minutes and 52 seconds. And there was a couple passes in this drive. Tua finding his favorite target, Tyreek Hill, a couple times. And then eventually essentially winning this game off of a pass to Tyreek Hill, in which it seemed like he was short of the first down. It was a crucial 3rd and 8 play. The refs were a bit generous when it comes to the spot of the ball, but at that point, after that pass, the game was essentially over. So at this point, the Dolphins finished this game going and are now 5-3, going into their next game, which is now against the Chicago Bears. They're going to be at the Bears, so this is going to be an interesting game because I'm assuming that it's going to be somewhat cold, somewhat windy because it is Chicago. And man, I don't know if you've ever been to Soldier Field, but there's something about where Soldier Field is at that it's just windy as all get out. So that game is this Sunday, November 6th at 1 p.m. And Tua, in my opinion, if we get a cold weather game, which is highly possible, I would like to see how Tua and this high-powered offense looks like when it comes to playing in a cold and windy environment such as Chicago. At this point, this is where we stand. We have 4 straight games against teams that are terribly under 500. And then we have a game against the Chargers December 11th, followed by 3 games, 4 if you count the Jets game on January 8th, that are essentially the games where the season will be determined. Overall, it's looking really good. I think if Tua stays healthy, and man, we saw a couple opportunities that Tua had that he would have normally tried to bulldoze over the defender. He really was able to slide. They weren't great looking slides, but at the same point, they were slides nonetheless. So that's a huge plus, and I think if that's in fact the Tua that we're going to see when it comes to not trying to do too much, but trying to stay alive and go on to the next play, I think we're in for a rest of the season with Tua Tagovailoa at the helm. And man, let me tell you, this team does not look the same without Tua Tagovailoa under center. So that's it. After next week, we'll officially be in the middle of the season. And I really think we are looking at a high probability of the Dolphins making a postseason appearance. Hopefully, they're able to get the monkey off their back, just like the Panthers did this past season in winning a playoff game. For the Dolphins, is winning a playoff game. For the Panthers, it was winning a playoff round. This has been the Miami Dolphins instant reaction of the 2022 NFL season of Game 8 against the Detroit Lions. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. I hope to see you on the next video. If you like this video, please subscribe. Please like it. Please share it. And we will continue to have these game reactions for the entirety of the 2022 NFL season for your Miami Dolphins.